RNP's cybersecurity strategy for connectivity and academic networks. Speakers are Ingrid Barbosa, who is Information Security Analyst at the Cybersecurity Intelligence Center of the National Research Network of Brazil, and João Pedro de Lima Casal, who is a security analyst. And we give the floor to them. And with that, we'll be finishing the morning session. Good afternoon. Good morning. I haven't had lunch yet, so it's good morning for me. So we will be brief because I'm sure you want to go and have lunch. I am Ingrid and he's João Pedro. We are security analysts at CAIS at RNP, the Brazilian National Research Network. We're going to be speaking about from risk to action in a different way. We are here to help you reflect on how cybersecurity decisions are made in your organizations. We would like to start with this number. Any idea what this number represents? This is a large number, 2,880,000. This number reflects the amount of cyber attacks that will occur in Latin America from now until the end of this talk. This occurs because in Latin America only we have more than 1,600 attacks per second. Another interesting fact is that from all the cybersecurity teams that work in Latin America, 60% acts reactively instead of proactively. In addition to that, out of all Latin American countries, only 7 have published plans to protect critical infrastructure from cyber attacks. We speak internet, telecommunications that are critical infrastructures. A picture of this is what was published at the beginning of the year by the World Economic Forum. This shows that from all parts of the world, Latin America is the region where there is less trust, the region that is worst prepared to respond to incidents. In addition to that, what I'd like to ask you is who belongs to the education area or telecommunications and government? Please show of hands. Who does not belong to any of those areas? So only a few people do not belong to these 3 areas. Why am I asking this question? In the first quarter this year, the 3 sectors of the industry that were most attacked are education, government, and telecommunications. In other words, in this room, we not only have those that were attacked most, but also those who are least prepared to respond to the attacks. That is why we decided to come here to speak about security with you. So an important question is security a feeling or a tangible condition? What comes to your mind? Something specific, or is it just a feeling? So based on that concept, please take a look at this picture. As you will note, there is no protection, there is no security at all. Zero security. There is no security at all in this picture. However, if you look at the body language of that individual, he doesn't seem to be at all worried about that. He's calmly proceeding with his job. Now, when we look at this child, look at this kid, imagine he's ready to go out to learn how to ride on a bike. He's completely protected, but look at his face. He is terrified. So to answer your question, is security a feeling or is security something tangible? It is both. So these 2 things have an influence on one another. So we understand that standpoint of cybersecurity. This really becomes quite clear. Now, this poses one of the major dangers in our area. This is the impression that you are protected, but you might not be protected. This is one of the dangers, thinking that you are secure, but if you do too much, like this child, how is a kid going to get onto a bike with all the things he's wearing? So if you take too much action, you won't reach your business objectives. So let us have a look at the current scenario. The cybersecurity challenges are overwhelming. We have geopolitical tensions. We have increasingly sophisticated cyber attacks. We have the supply chain interdependencies, regulatory requirements. They should be so, but these institutions have to adjust to these requirements. We have AI and the lack of professionals in the field. I don't know whether this happens to you, but we don't have resources to do all the things we would like to. So the reality is quite simple. There is no way in which you can protect yourself from everything. And my question is, should we try and protect everything? And this is a concept that those of you who studied security learned this on the very first day. A risk-based security approach. This is not something that is learned. So when we speak about risks, I don't know whether you stopped to think about this. We are assessing risk at all times. We exit this conference room and we start thinking about risk. Where we're going to have lunch, how long will it take us to have lunch before we come back to the event. We're always assessing risks. As we saw in the previous images, this is something that depends on our biases, on our life experiences. So the same person who makes biased decisions in their personal life is that person in your organization who also makes biased decisions regarding protection of their business. That is why risk is so important. It's not something that João or myself decided to come and speak to you about. There is a famous standard which is ISO 27001, and it says that preservation of confidentiality, integrity and availability of information through a risk management process is what should be done. But we don't read the entire phrase. We stop on the word information. We don't read the rest of the sentence. So everything should begin with risk management. What is that risk management? Risk management. We all have assets we wish to protect. These assets have weaknesses. They have vulnerabilities. The world is full of threats. The world is full of threat actors who are trying to explore these threats. Once a threat actor manages to exploit a vulnerability, this leads to an incident that will have an impact on your organization. So the risk arises from the likelihood of a threat actor exploiting the vulnerability and the impact that this incident might have on your business. So what we do in this regard, we apply controls to mitigate vulnerability and interrupt the cycle. But let us think of the effectiveness of our controls. This guy knew he would be could fall, so he uses the equipment to mitigate the fall. But he didn't tie the equipment to the rope. So in his mind, he is already applying control. He was confident and felt protected. So how often do we apply controls, but with major breaches that affect the effectiveness of the controls with a false impression of security? So speaking in numbers, we reach a value for that risk. We multiply the likelihood by the impact in a simplistic manner. Let us recall that this is not only about likelihood and impact, it's a two together. When we look at this graph, and I ask you, Which of these IP addresses with vulnerable servers would have the highest risk for your organizations? You might say BGP or OpenSSH, which are the ones that have the largest amount of IPs with vulnerable servers. This is a likelihood, it's not an impact. So maybe someone down on the red or the orange line will have a much higher impact compared to those with a higher likelihood in the graph. So we not only have to look at the likelihood, we also have to look at the impact. When we hear about the likelihood of something occurring, this could be a minimum chance. But when this happens, what is the outcome? What is the consequence? Maybe the likelihood wasn't that high, but the impact was high. Another one is this one over here. You might recall that not so long ago, someone decided to update the component of an antivirus in a Windows machine inadequately. This led to interruption in air traffic, not only in the United States, but all over the world. This was a small likelihood, but when this happened, what was the impact? So remember the two variables. Now, beyond what I have said and beyond the relevance this has, how regularly have we applied this concept to adopt cybersecurity risk assessment in our organizations?
We know that the gap exists because people have a lot of trouble putting theory and practice together. And there's also a trend that we have as human beings. It is to prioritize what is seemingly urgent instead of prioritizing what is strategically important for our business. So in CAIS RNP, that is a security area, we posed these questions and we realized that we needed a structured way to evaluate our risks in our system, and we decided to create a specific technology for this. So now I'm going to give the floor to João, who will explain how the methodology works. So, as Ingrid just said, we identified this need to be there for risk management and implementing risk methodology, and we saw that it was very complex. We didn't speak just of services, of RNP products, but the entire system with more than 4 million users, 500 organizations, with scattered all over the country. So we have another challenge. We are distant. That is, an organization is far from its neighbor. Its organization has its own culture in terms of regional cybersecurity and a different maturity degree. The idea is to have a generic methodology so that it may adapt to the reality of each institution, but that may also enable us to scale it up to adapt to this big size. So it was with that in mind that we looked for the best things in the market, what was already studied, precisely because in the security area we don't want to reinvent the wheel, because the best thing, the easiest thing, is to follow existing regulations and to do a logic analysis, and in all the period, if there are norms and models and methods, we try to develop a methodology that we apply in RNP. We have a 3D vision in our methodology with 3 levels. Those 3 levels are evaluated: tactical, technical, and operational. Security can affect one level that may affect the others in turn. So one of the things that we thought was RNP won't implement that alone. It will be done jointly with the client. And why? In an app, first of all, because to remove that paradigm, that risk analysis is an audit, a survey, an inspection, it's something that will only point out errors. Now, risk analysis is useful for the client because you can document whatever can be a problem. So being sure of the actions that you can do to mitigate all that. Another issue that the client, more than anybody else, knows the risks in their systems, their organization, and that is why we have more information that is customer based, and also to create that risk management culture in RNP. We're going to teach clients to do that risk assessment and to conduct a complete cycle of assessments. The methodology has 5 stages. The first of which, and first we see the scope and context, and we understand where it's going to be implemented. We close the scope to see what the limit is in an institution. We define the scope, and that part is sometimes ignored by many people. But in my view, it's the most important, because if you don't know what you are evaluating, if you don't know all the details, if you have the wrong idea of what you are evaluating, what's the use of having the best method for calculating risk? You may be very good surveying scenarios, but it has nothing to do with the reality. So it gives us a false impression that we are secure, or it exaggerates risks. That is why it's very important to understand the scope of what you are assessing. Then we conduct a risk assessment, identifying assets, threats, vulnerabilities, and risk scenarios to estimate the likelihood and the impact and the risk level. So we evaluate the threats, we sort them, we look at the assets, trying to identify their vulnerabilities, and sort them based on the threat they represent. An example is, if we have a server that is vulnerable in a company that can be attacked by an attacker and may be pulled down, we have a DDoS threat there. And after evaluating the assets at scope, at my reach, and the threats that may result from the vulnerability of those assets, we are going to identify the agents that may be a hacker, an internal agent, sometimes with no bad intent, or somebody in the supply chain. All those are potential risks, and users themselves may be another attacker. And so we have to try and find vulnerabilities. And so at the end, we look at it at a macro level, seeing if looking at the agent and considering the vulnerability and the threat, what will be the final scenario of this risk? For instance, it may generate an interruption in my system, and I may end up having a DDoS, and I won't be able, I'll have a time down. So we assessed the probability and the impact, and the odds are how likely is that to happen. Sometimes it may be more or less likely, depending on the people's motivation, or we can explore the vulnerability and the impact, looking at the final cause that the exploit of that threat may cause. So after mapping all the risks and after becoming aware of all the levels, I may define what I'm going to do with this risk, whether I'm going to mitigate it or just accept it. So once I've mapped all the risks and once I know what I'm going to do with each risk, I must define what I need to do. What are the controls that I'm going to implement to solve that and to implement the actions that I want? If I want to mitigate risk, what are the controls that I have to do? So if we're looking the people, the processes, the technology, and also what I would need to have to solve these controls, together with the risk assessment. So I'll design a plan, and in the shortest time possible, I need to move away as many risks as possible, and both technically and non-technically must use my risk analysis, I will introduce it to senior management or publicly or other people in the entity, and then to monitor. Am I being successful with all the controls? Do they work? Am I really reducing my risk level? And as I said, my big aim after monitoring is going and conducting a new analysis because the risk is continuous. This is an example of a risk panel. We sort them by agents, by assets, and while creating the methodology and its first applications, we had some lessons learned. Risk is continuous because it is a result of vulnerabilities, and vulnerabilities are occurring all the time. So we need to collaborate. It's non-negotiable. We need everybody to feel responsible about cybersecurity, and we have to celebrate wins. Even small risk mitigations deserve recognition because that is what keeps people moving. And you need to give incentives. Start with small things. It's impossible to try to solve everything. Sometimes I needed to increase the maturity of my team. So we start small and scale smart. We begin with limited scope, expand as maturity grows, and communicate directly. No intermediaries. We need to expect resistance because I'm changing processes, and changes always lead to resistance, especially when we see somebody from outside that comes and help implement changes. And essentially that people still think that risk is is something wrong in quality control, and we have to make people understand that that's not what it is. And when in doubt, you have to assume the worst. If you don't know whether it's high or medium, err on the side of caution in assessments. So think of it as if it is a big risk, because if afterwards it happens, then you won't be prepared. And after some time, that becomes part of the culture of the organization. So wrapping up, based on everything that we said, risk-based strategy and managing our uncertainties and fears in our favor will be able to improve the cybersecurity of our organizations. And a big issue is that we can't let security challenges get in the way of that mission, that is connecting people. That was our final slide with our contact data. Thank you. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask, and we are very happy to discuss these things with you. Thank you. Well, I want to thank these speakers. We are now wrapping up the morning session, LACNIC's Technical Forum. And after lunch, we'll resume at 2:15. So, as we are 15 minutes behind, we're going to start at 2:15 sharp. So please be here for our forums